thank you for joining us for this, the 18th virtual panel hosted by PAVE Europe. Today's panel is on understanding and pricing AV deployment risk. I'm Lukas Neckermann. I'm one of the co-founders and a board observer at PAVE Europe, and I'm pleased to welcome Hans Fridberg, head of Holo Norway. Also, Stefano Lassa, Chief Underwriting Officer at SCOR. Alex Gerodimos, Chief Growth Officer at Simulytic, and Rebecca Marsden, VP of Commercial Finance at OXA. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks, Lukas.
Thank you, Lukas.
Thank you.
So, with every new deployment of autonomous vehicles, new obstacles and learnings emerge. And for those who develop the AV drivers, for operators, and for insurers, assessing and pricing the associated risk remains a challenge. Today, we'll hear from multiple perspectives from an AV developer on ensuring the transparency of risk, from an AV operator on assessing the risk, from multiple AV developers. We'll also hear from an insurer on understanding the risk of an AV deployment request, and finally, from an insurtech expert who will outline how they quantify AV deployment risk to ensure evidence-based and consistent assessments. Now, PAVE Europe exists to inform a mass public on the benefits of automated vehicle technologies. And as such, many of our sessions are broad and somewhat more general in nature, highlighting certain areas of the autonomous puzzle. This panel, I should warn you, may not be for a mass audience. We'll dig pretty deeply into the details of pricing risk in the deployment of AVs, which makes it all the more wonderful for me to see so many people who have joined us today. Let's start with an integrator and an operator perspective. And for that, I'll turn to Hans. Hans, Holo has deployed a variety of autonomous shuttles all across the Scandinavian countries, in Oslo, in Helsinki, in Gothenburg, in Tallinn, with a variety of different vehicles. Can you tell us a little bit about how each of these deployments is similar and how each one is different?
Sure, I can do that. We can start with the differences. So we started with very simple projects with Navia vehicles and later with Sensible 4 vehicles, where it was A to B, and it was easy to manage or assess the risk, low speeds and so on. And then we have grown in complexity, both with Sensible 4, but also with our drones and delivery robots, and now towards Mobileye, our latest project in Oslo, where of course the complexity goes up a lot, higher speeds, much bigger operational area, and much more complicated traffic and ridership in the end. So yeah, the differences are basically that complexity is going up and up and up, and it's a new ball game every time we turn up one of these complexities. But the similarities are that much like this panel, it's all about managing that risk, and we see ourselves as basically a company that manages operational risk a lot of the way. So at the bottom of all our operations is risk assessment and continuous risk assessment. As we get new data in, we update our assumptions and assessments and adapt to that. So I'd say that's the similarities. It's just become more complex. And I would say that one point where it really jumped is when you get from basically a route which you can go through manually and imagine all the risks in every turn and every centimeter to areas where it's so big that it's impossible to do. And there we've developed some more automated ways of comparing a vehicle's ODD to the actual traffic situations it will be faced with. So that was the biggest jump maybe on the way towards more complexity.
So when you've planned for these deployments, first of all, how have you insured them? And second of all, what's the type of information that you would have shared with insurers or potential insurers so that they could get an accurate risk assessment and frankly also an accurate pricing on this risk?
Sure. I think if we start with the insurance agencies, in the beginning it was quite easy. The risk was so what could I say, you could easily get an overview of it, and speeds were so low that our normal insurance partners would be happy to step in and insure one or two extra vehicles. But as the complexity grew, we were unable to find any local insurance agencies in our region who wanted to work with us. So there we had to go to a broker. And of course, then we got into the international market where there are companies who've been thinking about it for a while. And what they asked for is we filled in a lot of these questionnaires from insurance agencies, right? And it's quite clear from our operational knowledge that they don't necessarily know what they are asking for. So we have provided them with our own very thorough risk assessment, which is used to get permits and so on, and that provides some of the information. We can give them our sort of descriptions of how we manage operations locally, but they also want to know a lot of things about the autonomous vehicle and the autonomous software. And for that, we need our partners involved. The autonomous software companies basically need to also give their input. So it's very much a collaboration, giving them the information they need.
Super. I think that's a bold statement there, Hans, that some of the insurers are not yet fully comfortable with asking the right questions. And maybe this panel will go some way to making sure that those who seek to insure AV deployments will ask the right questions. And frankly, we're primarily talking about liability risk here, which is so difficult to calculate and ascertain, primarily commercial or fleet operator liability, but it could also be product liability. If a vehicle is damaged, collision insurance, and it doesn't really matter for the purpose of this conversation, is, well, let's call it fairly standard. So really we're talking about primarily liability risk on various fronts. And let me turn next to you, Becky, because you and I, for that matter, are pretty unique in this autonomous industry because we do both come from an insurance background and now work in autonomous mobility. And OXA, of course, has a number of different partners that you work with. But let me focus on that first part. How does having an insurance background make life a lot easier for OXA and your insurance partners when you talk about current and future AV deployments?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lukas, and really nicely set the scene there. Thank you, Hans, very much for mentioning the key theme that I think we all like to see coming out of these sessions, which is collaboration. Really, the interesting and challenging thing about this risk, of course, is it's not just about managing it and quantifying it, but then we have to reach a point where we're able to price it and fundamentally articulate it clearly, not just to our partners and customers and insurers, but also to the wider ecosystem, so that everyone is comfortable with what the risk is and how it's being managed, what mitigation is in place. So I would say, from my perspective, coming across from the financial services and insurance market, the key kind of value add for someone with that sort of background coming into the autonomous vehicle space is the ability to act as an interface where we are able to clearly articulate what the key risk factors and risk drivers are from an insurance perspective. So to Hans's point, we would fully expect to need to explain our software, to share our risk assessments, absolutely, in the same way that Hans mentioned Holo do. We absolutely share our risk assessments. For OXA, just OXA as an example, not everyone is using the same go-to-market strategy, which is the exciting thing about this space. For OXA, our route is our product, because we're operating in somewhat more controlled ODDs. We've got quite very specific focus in terms of the industrial verticals we're focusing on. Our route is our product, and we will share our full risk assessment with our customers, with our partners, and also with our insurers, which breaks down the route on a very granular basis, so that our insurers, if we're picking up that particular partner example, fully understand how we perceive the risk, how we measure it. We then can work collaboratively to help inform how they might look to price it. It's a really interesting multifaceted approach, because obviously once you're talking about say level 4 operation, we're not talking about kind of an interdependability with a human driver. Actually, your risk is broken down to a kind of a 40%, perhaps the vehicle and associated software, and then as much as 60% could be your environment, the nature of the roads you're deploying on, who you're having to interact with, the time of day, the speed of the vehicle itself, as well as the speed limit on the road that you're deploying to. Weather conditions, does it often snow, does it rain? All of these things are the questions that we are able to direct our insurance partners to ask. And then once they're comfortable with asking these questions and understanding how they impact their risk, we can get into some very constructive conversations about how you might go about quantifying those on a relative basis. And it's absolutely a collaborative exercise. Insurance in the autonomous vehicle space is not transactional. We develop partnerships with our insurers, as we do with our customers and OEM and fleet operator partners. So it's highly collaborative. We are transparent to the extent that we will share the information that is pertinent to assessing the risk, because it's important that everyone feels that they understand what the risk is and how they might be able to really inform and curate their own risk management as a result.
Super. Thank you for that, Becky. And you, of course, as OXA, focusing on OXA, you've had a number of different deployments, and those have been both on highway and off highway. Can we just focus a little bit on the difference between those two considerations? Is 60, 80, 95% of the questions and the content or the variables the same between those, or is it a fundamentally different proposition if we're running AVs in a on-highway environment versus something that's a controlled or a campus or an industrial application?
Yeah, I mean, from a third-party bodily image damage and property damage perspective, the risk profile is quite different. There is a key difference in the complexity. So as Hans mentioned, that there is quite a broad spectrum of complexity these days in terms of the ODDs that are currently being operated. If you're looking at the off-highway, quite often your exposure to third-party bodily damage is massively controlled, because you might be in controlled environments where only a certain number of people are allowed on the premises. They're probably employees. They're accustomed to the technology and interacting with said technology. You may well not be interacting with other moving vehicles, may or may not be the case. All of these things are really important when it comes to your third-party liability aspect. Obviously, if you're looking at physical damage and you're deploying on your own property, it's first-party property damage only. So that has a material impact. Even on the on-highway, there's a spectrum of complexity, and we are very transparent in what that spectrum looks like. The size of your vehicle and what it is doing has a huge impact. And for example, if you're carrying passengers, that exposure will look quite different versus if you're carrying, for example, groceries. So there are differences. It's not purely on versus off highway. There are kind of range of ODD complexities within each of those two segments. But fundamentally, yes, big difference. And we're part of the educational process to make very clear what that difference is. Empowering people to understand how the exposures differ, and actually it's been a really interesting exercise, because it proves a really accessible entry point for people who are looking to understand the technology better, but perhaps don't have appetite immediately to go straight to passenger transportation. Perhaps they would like to look at industrial logistics in the first instance on an environment where it's largely first party property, not many humans on the premises, typically can get comfortable with that, learn to ask the right questions, we're transparent with risk assessments, and then we expand in concentric circles, and you end up with a very fruitful partnership with an insurer who actually ends up being comfortable in insuring passenger shuttles driving around in an urban environment for, in Florida, for example. So it's part of the journey. There are differences, definitely. Our role in this is being transparent about what those differences are.
Super, thank you for that. And I think quite naturally now we should turn to the insurer and to Stefano as an insurer. I'd love to hear what it is that helps you make an assessment, and frankly also to come to a price. But let's start with the question: how many deployments have you done of AVs, and how big is your appetite going forward?
Well, thank you, Lukas, and thank you also to the previous panelists, because they gave already a number of very interesting points that could be linked to the insurance side and to the insurance way of thinking. So first of all, we do come from a world that looks or may look the most traditional ones among the various activities that are being performed and explained today. At the same time, our life is within risk. So we live because there is risk. So when there is a new form of risk, then that's our place as well. So this is, first of all, the reason why we well, particularly in our company, but I think in the insurance world, the reinsurance world, I'll touch a word of that later on. We definitely think that it is necessary to understand the risk, of course, in order to being able to underwrite it, to price it, and at the end pay claims when and if they will come. So how many deployments? It's difficult to say in this sense, because we've seen, first of all, many pilots, individual cases. That we as reinsurer, we tend to have a sort of an approach where we insure the insurance companies, first of all. So the immediate contact with the customer, so could be the operator of the vehicle, would be the insurer, that would come to us to get support on the specific risk or on a category of risk. So we, first of all, we see what we see through our insurance customers, and we also see, picking up on the comment of Hans before, that there is an extremely wide variety of approaches by insurance companies. I fully agree on that, and not all of them are let's say technically at the same level in terms of understanding what the actual risk is. Some try to sort of frame the risk within what they know. So what can I do, or what I know, how can I use what I know to apply to this new risk? And some sort of try to branch out into questions that are difficult for us, because there is actually one point what I would like to underline. There is a kind of change of DNA for insurers at this point. Motor liability is one of the most traditional areas of underwriting for insurance. Well, now we need also a different type of underwriter for that line of business, because that line of business risks being less defined as motor mobility, but it will extend into something that has also other guarantees. Products liability was mentioned before, but there are for sure other ones. So we've seen deployments in a number of, well, we decide out of choice for the moment to concentrate on Europe, so that sort of limits the number of deployments. But we've actively seen a few tens of tenders, but we probably are at the end on about a dozen, a bit more than a dozen, in UK, France, Germany, Nordics. These are the countries where we see the activities, and I think I'm not disclosing any state secret on this point. But this is actually the size, but it's developing. It goes from one vehicle to a fleet. It could be one vehicle on a closed circuit. It could be on a logistics area, or it could be a fleet of buses, for example.
So that's super interesting, because you spoke to the different skill sets that are now required as well. Really, the Swiss Army knife of risk assessment, because you are, yes, it's individual vehicle, it's fleet, it's product liability, operator liability, and different pieces. Now, that's certainly one of the learnings. Are there other learnings that you've taken away through some of the deployments, maybe even some surprises that you've encountered along the way?
There are other learnings, but for the moment, for the let's say disappointment of our actuaries, we haven't got enough information, data basically, to feed into a proper model for a traditional pricing for a reinsurance or even insurance conventional pricing. However, it is very interesting to see that we notice the care that and the deepening of the software information that we get from the operator, from the software company. And so the information, the level of information, the detailed level of information, which brings us back to the fact we must be able to read that information, understand it, and store it and use it. But that is basically a very positive for us, because we see that there is a lot of attention in developing the risk that is then brought into the environment. I pick up also on the remark of Rebecca before about the importance of the environment in the third-party liability. We all come from a traditional motor third party, where basically we know a lot of statistical data about how vehicles behave. Well, here we have to learn, and we haven't come to that point. In terms of surprises, I would say the positive is actually the attention to the care that the developers have to this point of how the software works and how they describe the process to non-experts like us, like, for example, the insurers. On the other side, I have to say, I'm curious to see. So it's a surprise as well in a way, because one of our concerns as reinsurers, so companies getting risks from many different insurance companies, so sort of aggregating those risks, is the accumulation of these ones. So one of the things that we are curious to see on how it develops is cyber. So that could be another area to consider in terms of future pointing of attention about the insurance world.
Interesting. Just one more challenge for the underwriter then. Absolutely. Now, Stefano, you spoke to the still relative dearth of data from actual deployments, and of course, one way to address that is through running millions and millions of miles of simulated deployments as well, which I think is a good transition over to Alex, because Simulytic is a slightly different animal in this ecosystem. You calculate the risk of an autonomous deployment using simulation prior to an insurer being able to quote and price the TPL insurance for the launch of a deployment. Could you tell us a little bit more about how this works?
Sure. Thank you, Lukas. Before I go into the how, I'd just like to spend a second on the why, because all the previous speakers gave elements that build that case. Hans spoke about the difficulty getting meaningful questions in a dialogue with the insurer, and the role that increasing complexity of the ODD has on understanding risk. Becky brought up the need for collaboration and also how important it is different variables and complexities of the ODD influence risk. And Stefano mentioned that the traditional process of motor insurance is kind of threatened, and there's a absence of data, meaningful data that can be used in order to, or comparable data can be used for this. So that's really the motivation for this. And then how it works, I describe it as a three-step process. In the first one, as you alluded to, we replicate the driving environment digitally. With that, I mean all the infrastructure, the road use and the operational details. Becky mentioned quite a few of those, and all of those are relevant. We then simulate the operation under the same variety of traffic, weather, light, and operating conditions that the AV is likely to face in real life, not in edge cases, but in the reality of that operation. And then finally, we evaluate the interactions with other road users. That includes vulnerable road users where they are present. And then we note how often risky situations happen and how serious they might become if something went wrong. I'm not assuming that something will always go wrong, but if something did go wrong, how would that turn out in terms of liability? And these findings are synthesized into a single risk score, which will then provide the insurer.
So that single risk score, I mean, how do I imagine? There's like a no claims discount for a driver, except it's for the robot. Are insurers happy to take just one number?
I'd say that as a starting point for if you're doing a year-over-year location comparison, yes. We believe it's possible to use that as a starting point together with accumulating experience over ensuring AV deployments. But in terms of what's available, the score is really just the tip of the iceberg, because there are also scores by scenario, by location, by time of the day, all of which help someone understand the risk envelope, if you like. And also you can break down the risk events by the type of participant, first and third party liability, and so on. All in all, you can develop insights about the deployment risk that you wouldn't otherwise have, as Stefano alluded to. So I think the risk score plus the insights package, as we call it, do help you go some way in the direction of pricing the deployment, but not as a simple multiplier. I wouldn't suggest that. It's more complex than that, and there are multiple perspectives. Becky alluded to that. I would expect that this is more a vehicle for dialogue between the insurer and the insured party, where the insured party brings also separate evidence. They compare notes and they have a dialogue, not over a questionnaire that, as Hans pointed out, is perhaps not the most adequate, but over data sets that initially might be divergent and have different perspectives. One focuses more on the environment, the other one focuses more on the AV performance. But as things develop and more experience is built and a shared understanding, they become a common way of looking at the problem.
Thank you, Alex. Now, prior to this virtual panel, we asked all of the people who are joining to submit their own questions. I have quite a long list of questions, but I'd like to go to some of the questions that we got from our participants today. And I'll start with Hans. And this question comes to us from Dallas, Texas. When comparing and evaluating the safety and reliability of different AV technologies, what criteria or benchmarks does Holo use to assess the risk from the different AV developers?
Unmute there, it is, yeah. We evaluate a lot of vendors all the time because we're trying to find the best technology for the project that we're doing. And risk is one of them, but we have I think we have 200 questions about that we try to get answers on, and there's 16 categories, and risk is part of that. I would say that we start usually just by asking if you accept product liability, because that's actually a lot of these autonomous software developers are not there
Seem
yet.
to be an exclusion.
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, that stops the conversation very early. So that's one of the first questions we asked, right? And then we dig deeper. It's all about getting into what kind of data do you have on performance in real life situations, what kind of simulation data do you have, what kind of internal risk assessments are you doing yourself, and if they're able to show pretty mature documentation, we can evaluate that directly. But of course, there are many different standards for evaluating risk, so it becomes a task for us to try and compare them. I hope this answers the question.
I think so. Certainly, we do have a Q&A box if active participants do want to weigh in with their questions, and I'll take one from there now. And the question is for Alex on whether or not AV software companies are hesitant to provide their data to get that single Simulytic score.
I think they're understandably hesitant because there's a good phasing of things that needs to happen. And our view is that we should perhaps start with a light touch, where the questionnaire focuses more on the details of the operation and the location. And as I mentioned earlier, increasingly when the things have matured to the point where there's mutual trust, a common understanding of the technical challenges, and the environment is more ripe for the time and resource to be dedicated to integrating stacks and doing detailed assessments of AV operators, AV developers, bearing in mind, though, that we also want to avoid reproducing the work that the AV developers do themselves already from the safety standpoint. This is work done for insurance, and therefore we need to be efficient. So I would say that if I put myself in the shoes of AV developers, I would understandably hesitate at this stage to share too much information, not only because it would be a slight distraction from my main tasks of commercializing this technology, but also because it might not be as relevant right now. It will become relevant over time. So that's how we approach this.
One of the key challenges is going to be, of course, data and the operating system for autonomous vehicles is going to be constantly updating. Over-the-air updates mean that the actual capabilities of the vehicle change over time, and that could be once a month, it could be weekly, it could be daily, and that would seem to imply that from an insurance perspective, the risk changes at least the same level of frequency. And so I'll turn to Stefano for this question. How often would you need to reevaluate, considering those software updates? And then we'll turn to Hans after that.
Well, on the assessment of an individual deployment, I think that every end of a cycle of trials or work should be the right moment for a check on what is being actually achieved. That could be actually weekly at the beginning, actually could be monthly. So it's difficult to answer now on a generalized basis, but it is likely to be very much case by case, but very often. That's the idea, because it's I mean, this is exactly counterintuitive for the traditional motor or liability insurer that has or loves to live on decades of sort of replicable and comparable data that can be used for the simulation. So more often than not, but it really depends on case by case.
Thank you, Hans.
Yes, I just wanted to add a comment to what you said with that. Now I lost my thread here. The point,
the updating of the
was when we
software
assess,
and the regularity of the risk assessment.
Exactly right. So when there's updates to the software, which happens frequently, we can't necessarily always support a risk assessment with data because things are changing all the time, and that's where our assessment of the vendors, this sort of general safety culture and risk handling culture becomes very important, because we evaluate procedures for these updates very carefully to see that they actually have the right testing procedures in place before they push an update, and that we also get the chance to review and approve that before it's put on our vehicles, for example, right? So So it cannot all be data driven. It has to be about assessing things like safety culture as well.
I agree. I
Safety
think
culture,
that's really important, and feeds into the partnership model that we see in this industry when you're talking about insurers supporting the rollout of this technology. Trust is a huge component here, and we see the best results when we build a partnership with insurers who are who buy into the safety culture of an autonomous vehicle safety software developer. And absolutely, there will be a transparency of data when the data is available, but it's actually much deeper than that. It's a cultural approach to deployment. Safety is the priority and must be the foundation upon which all of this growth is built. And developing that relationship in the first instance is the key to building the sort of relationships with insurers where they're comfortable asking the right questions. They feel like they're being updated on a regular cadence. As I said, it's not transactional. This is not a once a year renewal process. You typically see a really high level of engagement across the insurance space in this technology. Speaking on behalf of a multitude of operators and software companies in this space, I know we all operate very collaboratively with our insurers, and there is an understanding there that we're building a partnership for the long term. It's not a kind of once a year go out, get quotes, bind something off the shelf and forget about it.
Becky and Hans, you both spoke to the safety culture and safety first culture, and it's surely fair to say that OXA and Holo practice exactly what they preach. We'd like to think that all operators, developers, and those who deploy are thinking in a similar way. But nevertheless, there could still be differences. Now, I want to take this back to kind of where we're coming from. Now, today, in an L2 sort of world, insurers might give discounts for AEB or adaptive cruise control or whatever, based on the data, for example, from IHS that exists, that there's a reduction in frontal collisions and things like that. Now, that's mostly based on existing data that shows the safety of these systems, but it's fairly agnostic to the OEM. And it doesn't ask, for example, did this particular AEB or ACC or whatever ADAS system get developed by Bosch or Conti or whoever it got developed by? So it's supplier agnostic and probably OEM agnostic. Now, that obviously changes significantly when we talk about fully autonomous systems, where we're actually evaluating the supplier, the tech, plus the hardware, and on top of that, the operator and the fleet manager, whoever is running the vehicles. And there's so many parts to this machine now. Who bears the greatest responsibility and ultimately the greatest liability in this puzzle? Maybe Becky first, and then Stefano, we can turn to you.
It's a great question, and I would say I think that that is still evolving and emerging in terms of the line of sight we have to how that will ultimately play out. The liability landscape is quite complex, and to your point, Lukas, that there will always, with any deployment, typically be multiple parties involved, and that with each with associated liability, depending on the nature of the incident. So I don't think you could say, definitively any one party is responsible, full stop, and that responsibility relies solely with them. There will be some kind of distribution of liability. We're seeing that landscape evolve and emerge constantly. To Hans's point, product liability is a really important aspect. As an autonomous vehicle software developer, is it really acceptable to try and remove yourself from product's liability exposure? That's a question for the panel and for the audience. How is that really possible to come to market with a product and realistically imagine that you can detach yourself from product's liability? That genuine question. I don't know how anyone would expect to execute on that. Similarly, from an OEM perspective, if there is a problem with the vehicle that has been for which the OEM was responsible for manufacturing, it seems only reasonable that they would, where the cause of the incident is an OEM fault, then they too would have appropriate levels of responsibility. How that plays out is something, as I said, that's evolving all the time. There are insurance solutions emerging that cover all risks, irrespective of cause of incidents, and we're seeing increasing momentum in that direction. But yeah, it's not. I personally don't see us reaching a point where one party is responsible for all liability in totality.
But that also means, in turn, just as we need more skills on the underwriting side, we'll also need a whole new skill set on the claims side, really an analysis on every incident, on which part of the chain bears the greatest responsibility.
The good news about that is that from a, for example, from a claims perspective, theoretically, the depth of data and the completeness of data available should mean that actually it's very obvious immediately what happened and what fault caused the incident. So that actually should hugely streamline the claims process. The data will become critical in this, and there'll be a lot of conversations over the coming years about how much data people need to share and will be mandated to share in order to facilitate this sort of claims process and rapid settlement. But yes, the data will be there. So as long as there's some kind of standardization adopted across the industry in terms of how much data needs to be shared in order to facilitate that, that should be streamlined and much less complex actually than in a traditional human-driven vehicle incident scenario.
Super. Thank you, Becky. Stefano, how are you going about upskilling your underwriters and also your claims teams to fully understand and be able to dissect these incidents?
This is actually a great question in this slide, because basically we need to educate underwriters to be intercultural across all the as many areas as possible, and a lot of the discussion will have to be brought on a level where we are available to available to discuss on software skills rather than actually the behavior of the driver. There is actually another point that I wanted to pick up from broadly from what Becky was saying before. I think this all what we are seeing brings us very much in the direction that the ideal user of these vehicles, at least for some time ahead, will be the fleet. So there will be, rather than the individual, it will be a fleet that has a risk management organization that goes into the idea of protecting people, protecting things within a company or outside on the roads, or a circuit on the roads, and therefore there is a risk management that will support the claims activity when there is a claim. On a claim, before saying that we are right at the beginning in upgrading our claims department on the claims handling. I have to be very, very, very straightforward and honest about this on the autonomous vehicles. I think it is important to say that the landscape will change so much that one of the most important links to which insurers are used to have a discussion, a dialogue with in case of a liability claims, which is the lawyers, because of the transparency of each and every step that Becky was mentioning a moment ago, will have a different role, to say the least. Saying at the last thing, imagine that also that in public traffic, in public circulation, you may actually have a vehicle insured by a small company, a small insurance company that might have to have subrogation recourse against a very large one, and that will bring on the other side different types of skills that are not known at the moment, because there will be technical skills that are simply not in the market for the time being.
Super. Thank you. I'd like to get now to once again to a question that we got from our participants before the virtual panel, and this one goes to you, Alex. In the insurtech space is of course evolving just as the mobility space is, which means that there are constantly new innovations, new developments, and how, on the other hand, does the insurtech industry keep informing and communicating and advising, frankly, the rest of the mobility community, such as the ones on this panel, operators, developers, about the possibilities that exist on the insurance side?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at the intersection of a very particular niche here, as you know, and I think you personally, Lukas, are very well positioned to understand exactly the landscape and where we sit inside it. So I think by the very nature of that intersection, there's a lot of in interaction with the mobility space, especially public transport operators, initiatives about shared mobility, and the increasing environmental consciousness and what that means in terms of mobility transformations that we experience. So I think there's a healthy exchange with conferences, events, and panels that bring across the different discussions that we have as an insurtech in this space. I don't think I can speak to how, you know, broader insurtech initiatives outside of the mobility space might interact with that. But I think for us, it's crucial. You know, last week we saw each other at a mobility conference. I think in July next week we will see each other again. Likely, most of us. It's not a coincidence. I think it's just a natural part of the intersection of these worlds that needs to continue to exist. If the partnership approach that Rebecca alluded to is key in this, and of course we are in PAVE, so it's quite appropriate to remind ourselves of that need.
That's a lovely transition and opportunity for me to get a plug in for anyone who's a participant, who's part of the audience today. PAVE Europe is, of course, a membership-led organization with 25 current members. We have a number of working groups that work on different elements in different parts of the puzzle. One of those working groups is indeed on insurance, and we've been thinking very, very hard in that working group on how to communicate, on the one hand, to a mass audience, and on the other hand, as you say, Alex, to an insurance audience, to make sure that everybody's, you know, getting on the same page about the types of risks, quantity, quality, scope of the risk that we're going to be facing as there are more and more deployments. I am going to turn to one more question, two more questions that we have. And maybe, Alex, this one is also for you, and it is around balancing between simulation and real life. How accurate can we expect simulations to be when they coexist with the experiences of real life deployments? Can we bring those two things together, or is it either one or the other?
Certainly not either one or the other. They're complementary, but also there's a timing element to it. That's why we start with simulation. In a way, real life in this space especially, but in general, lags behind simulation, not only in terms of accumulating decades of data. We have that luxury in the traditional human-driven space, but not in the autonomous space. But also, if we think the locations where we have the data are currently very specific, the extent to which we have data is also very limited by the ODDs, which have, because the developers are rightly safety conscious, have been also quite restricted. And as they expand every time they make a new step in the right direction, we encounter something new. So I think simulation helps fill that gap, and the gap that you alluded to earlier, when we have a new version over the air update and new things happen, and there's a legitimate claim on behalf of the developer that the technology is much improved, the insurer or the other audiences would like to verify that claim in some way, and there needs to be a data-based dialogue on that. they cannot be done based on real data because we're going to have to wait for the time to pass. And I think it's in everybody's interest to use simulation as a tool. But of course, real data always comes in for the insurance's claims. For the rest of us, it's just ground truth data, and would like to have that and go back and improve our models. And this is just a constant cycle.
Thank you. So as we well know, in the value chain of autonomous and shared mobility, there have been a lot of companies coming together, companies going apart. There have been partnerships forged, partnerships that have broken apart. There have been many, many different conjoinings of organizations in order to make sure that we have the right skill sets at the right place. And I turn now in that context to a question that comes from an attendee as well. And it's around partnering, investing, building, or buying. These are kind of the choices that you have. And let me turn to Stefano for this one. In terms of upskilling, because we talked about that earlier, upskilling in the insurance, whether it's primary or reinsurance, do you think there's more scope for insurers to partner, to invest, to build, or buy in order to get that full skill set on both the underwriting and the claim side?
That's a very interesting question, also because it goes across very much corporate cultures, and they vary, they are different. But personally, and this is more a personal belief rather than a company belief, I would say that partnering, as the word I was actually moving around today, the panel, I think partnering would be the most immediate reaction to this, because we cannot expect ourselves to be able to do everything at the same level. So I think we need to team up to get better level and learn more, learn better about the new development. So my choice would be for partnering.
Any dissenting views on the panel? I think we've talked a lot about partnerships, but there's surely no doubt that there will be consolidation as well.
No, fully agree with that. And I think we see in terms of bringing new technology to market, and just to kind of build on Stefano's point, that's not purely from an insurance perspective. I think really when you're talking about bringing new technology to market, and we're in a as an industry, we're in the high growth phase because we're starting to see public adoption and increasing really visibility of this technology. Partnership is really important because we cannot invent everything in-house. So it works on the other side of the table as well from a technology perspective. Leverage the expertise that we have adjacent to our industry to really propel ourselves forward, rather than deploying more capital and spending more time building in-house what already exists elsewhere. Not really. If we're talking about accelerating this at the pace that we think it can achieve, I would fully agree that partnership is really important. And I think it's a model you see being, as you said, Lukas, a model you see being adopted across the industry. Doesn't necessarily always work perfectly every time, but that's the point about innovation. You know, we are creating something new, and that's part of the journey that we're all on.
Superb. Thank you. I'm going to take one final question, and it has come from 3 different directions, and it addresses something that we don't usually address as PAVE Europe, and that's about this transition period towards fully automated vehicles, and that's remote driving. And maybe Hans, you can address this, and that's how do we address this transition period? Is it something that we squirm about, that we say, well, we don't really want to deal with this? Is it something that we're embracing? And in the case of an incident or crash, who then is responsibility? And fully recognizing that there are different nuances to what remote driving means, as opposed to remote operation versus remote monitoring. Maybe you can just shed some light into that.
Yeah, sure. I think from our perspective, and very much from having done lots of operations, is that responsibility and liability needs to be in a very defined place. Responsibility for operation needs to be in one place. It's very much like you can't be half pregnant. You're either responsible or you're not, right? So and I think from our perspective, when you have a safety driver on board, you can put the responsibility on the safety driver, or you have to put it at a remote operator, or not a remote operator, on the autonomous system, basically, because we don't see that we can safely put responsibility on a remote operator. It needs to be either the system or the safety driver. That's at least how we see it. I know there are differing opinions here, but that's our perspective.
I tend to agree. Thank you for that, Hans. I'm going to ask every panelist today to just share some final and closing thoughts and words as we conclude this panel. And I'll start with you, Stefano.
Thank you, Lukas. Actually, I think that it is extremely important coming out of this panel to have the view of the need to partner and the need to be open to this new innovation. And from the insurance point of view, the very important need to continue to give the security that the insurance is able to give to the developments of new risks, and therefore making sure that these new risks can be to the advantage of the people, of the larger mass, because there is something that gives financial security should anything go wrong.
Thank you. Next, Alex.
Yeah, I think building on what Stefan just said, the partnership, and also looking at one of the questions that is in the Q&A, when will the cost of insurance go down? When we all get together and together collectively gather the evidence that we need in order for insurers and the market to respond in a price-conscious way in the direction. And then that will unlock, I believe, the proliferation of AVs in appropriate use cases. So we each have to make a contribution, partnering together in that direction.
Super. Thank you, Alex. Hans.
No, I fully agree with with Stefano and Alex. It's partnerships, and there's I can provide only one part of the picture, but I definitely need the others to make a full picture and bring the cost down in the end.
Great, thank you. Finally, Becky.
Obviously, fully agree. Strategic partnerships, honestly, really, I don't think we can hammer this home enough. Strategic partnerships to leverage complementary skills, because everyone brings something to the table, is very much part of the growth journey of this industry, of this ecosystem. Risk capital and insurance is a huge part of that. It's an enabler for bringing this technology to market, and everyone has something to add to the conversation around how to understand, manage, and articulate risk.
Thank you so much. And partnership comes out very, very clearly. And as it so happens, it is literally the first letter in PAVE. So with that, thank you each for stressing that point. Thank you for joining on this panel. A big thank you as well to the participants and to March and Nicola, who have been guiding us in the background on this from a communications and a tech point of view. And a big request for everybody to please make sure to sign up for and follow PAVE Europe on LinkedIn and on Twitter and other social media channels, and sign up for newsletters that will be coming out soon. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day.